Hello, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well. So, today we will be continuing our journey, and today we will be trying to understand more details about um, um, data storage in Swift. This is in this chapter. In this, we'll be dealing more about how non-persistent storage works rather than persistent one. So, the difference between persistent and non-persistent is persistent will remain even if the data has been lost, and then the non-persistent, sorry, even if the app shuts down, the persistent data will still remain intact. Non-persistent is on the fly, it's stored in the RAM, goes out the moment there is uh, the moment the data the moment you close or shut down the app, this will be deleted. Okay, now there are different types of patterns that can be used while working with data. Core data is not different. So yeah, first we will be um, first we will be studying about some concepts, how we structure our data, and then core data is not different. So once we have this core data, then we will understand what um so we'll learn concepts here, and we'll some this will be more a theoretical lecture, um because there's a lot of things that this will have a lot of theory. um so, yeah, as I said, this will have so I don't know, when I press the button P, I guess something happens. Yeah. Yeah. So as I said, in this we'll be studying a lot about the theory before diving deep. So basically, there are what we I was saying is there are different data concepts. There are similar patterns that can be used. It can be found when working with data. Core data is not different, and then here we'll be studying about the theory. Okay. So now the first thing that we are going to study is something called as I have the toolbar up or something. Does it move? So the first thing that we will be studying is the data model. This is basically how data will be present in our file. Um, okay. Like how will we structure data um in our file? Like how the data will be written and structured. Okay, so there are four more components when we deal with data. This is basically like a general design principle while handling data. So we categorize, like we divide um we divide the process into four steps. Let's see the steps one by one. The step one is basically the data structure. Then step two is the toolbox. All the tools come in here. Third is the playground, like the actual playground. And then fourth is the view. What will happen to the view when uh, we what will happen to the view when we have the data with us? So as I said, um yeah, so then this is like a kind of a general mechanism for data. Whenever we'll deal with data, there are 2 to 3 steps, or you can say um like um 2 to 3 steps that we follow whenever we deal with data. First is basically we have the data structure. Second is the toolbox. Third is the playground, and then fourth is the view. So let's see each one of them more in more details. Okay, now first is basically the data model. Now, data model, this is the first part of the model. We'll see what a data model. Okay, so what is present? You can call this data structure as the data model as well. So we'll try to understand how this data structure or model looks like. Okay, so now what is our data model? See again that has gone out. The moment I press key D or something. Wait, let me change something here. There it is. Yes, let's go here. Then when I go to video hotkeys, uh, oh yeah, any instead of that, let's not have any hotkey right now. So our hotkeys are disabled right now, so it shouldn't go now. Yeah. So then when we think about the data model, um let's see what do you mean? The data model or the data structure. What do we mean by this? So the first thing that we talk about is okay. Now the data model is basically where the data will be stored. Um so in so it is like a blueprint of the data. It is a blueprint of the data, and then so in general this data model is a um, is a is a struct or a class. In general terms we say this is a like a struct or a class. Okay, now core data needs to know how to store a person. We need to define some way, right, in the app. For example, you need to get that data in your app in some way, whether it can be using any type of structure. Maybe it can be an array, but in general we kind of use two things. One is a structure, and then the other one is a class. Now these basically represent the it kind of represents how the data model, or how the it kind of gives a blueprint about the data. Okay. Now The data models now, what further we are saying is these are further made up of data objects. Let's see. So data model further consists of data object. Now what is an data object? So data object is when we actually create an instance of that structure or a class. This is called as data object. So to summarize, you can say um, this is the data model or the structure. Now in reality it's a blueprint. And then what does this contain? Now this consists of something called as data objects. What is this objects? This is the actual instance of the data or whatever structure we are using. Perfect. Now, again, you define your data model description in a special data model file that core data uses. Now he's saying, so now how do we structure our files? So what we do is, how do we like structure our file? So remember, so structuring our file. These are very important rules because this helps a lot in code readability. So first, so what we do is we create a file which has, so we define a model description in a special data model that the core data uses. Now this helps us cover that core data, how you want to structure. Later we'll learn how to use. So we create a file which has the data model, or in other words the blueprint. Now this is stored in a file. We name that file as data mod. Okay. Now the name of that file is data model. So by the name itself, we come to know that this is how that data will be stored in our file. Okay. Now so like we studied, first is basically the model. The second is something called as, so we were trying to understand. So first thing that we have is the data model. The next thing that we have in the data flow is something called as the toolbox. Now what is this toolbox? Now as the name suggests, now the uh, so let's see. Now you can have two types of tools, right? Since in iOS two types of data storage is possible, so we need two varieties of tools. One is for persistent storage, another is for non-persistent storage. So first is when we say this is for persistent storage, and then the other one is for non persistent storage. Now, when your app has the data, you have to store it somewhere where it persists, so that even when the app is closed, the power is lost, the data is not lost. So persistent storage, again we said, when the data is remains intact, whether when we have power or without power, that is called as persistent. Non-persistent is basically something that clears off when the power is lost. The core data will store values to the physical storage on the device so that it can persist after closing the or shutting off the app. Okay, so now for persistent thing, we have something called as NS persistent container. Now this the core data use the NS persistent container to now how is this possible? To have this, we do like this is present in a container which is called as um, NS persistent container. Now, okay, now this is the toolbox. This is the toolbox for our persistent form of data, right? So where we are physically or using the tools. Now the NS stands for next step. Now before we had the term iOS, it was previously called as next step. So Apple had bought 1997, and then Apple had the foundation of the Apple system ecosystem was based on um, next step. It's a next step company, and then so using the abbreviation we say um, so next step is basically that company that was bought by Apple and became the foundation of Mac OS in 2000. Yeah, it's old, but it's continuously being worked on. Now, what does this container do? Now, this will read your data model, sets it for use, controls where your data is persistent, responsible for loading up your. Okay. Now see the role of this NS or next step. Okay. So then the first role is basically it decides, it um, reads the data model and sets it for usage. So like initializing using it for usage purpose. The next thing that we do is um, see again this is so as we said, the toolbox, there are two possible ways, right? One is for persistent, the other is for non-persistent. When you come inside persistent storage, there is something called as NS persistent container present. Now, what is this NS in this? Initially, it was Next Step, which was bought by Apple like back in 1997, or 1997 is when I was born, and then this laid the foundation for Mac OS in 2000. Now, what are the functions of this persistent container? We are studying that. Um, okay, so first is basically it is kind of going to initialize the storage, and create a blueprint, read the blueprint which has been created in the data model. Then it controls where, so the user has to not worry where the data will be stored in the persistent memory. This container will take care of that. So like we don't uh, we don't have to worry about it. I mean, it is automatically taken care by the container itself. And then the third is basically third that we have is the third role or responsibility is it is responsible um, the job of loading the data is it's, or it is the functionality of getting the data from the memory when the app loads. That responsibility is taken care by it is by the persistent container. So it is responsible for loading the data from the container where the from the container where, or from the memory we can say, where it was stored in the persistent memory or SSD. Sorry, yeah. SSD is responsible for handling persistent storage, right? Oh, I see. So let's have, we won't use this key much, so it's better to have this. So if you go here and then okay, yeah. So the again, this is the job of the container. As a developer, we don't have to worry about it. Okay. Now think of container as a tool, as a box that can hold many things. A container can hold tools, foods, pencils, etc. In programming, containers can hold a collection of an objects. And the persistent container is a toolbox container. Yeah. So we say this comes under the toolbox. Why? Because you know it's handling the memory. It is responsible for loading the data and it is giving us all sorts of help. For example, if you have a tool, right? When you go, when you have a toolbox, right? You have all the necessary tools required. For example, if you are a carpenter, then you will have all the necessary tools that you had that you need to make furniture inside the box. So we say that as a toolbox, right? Now, now we come to the part where we, so first we have defined how the structure. Second is the container that is response or the tools that we need for managing that data. The next is basically where the data objects changes are managed. This is in the playground where we need a playground where we can play with data. Many times after fetching the data, you enable the user to insert new data, change the data, delete, or you provide some other options. This is where you will do it with the object. So now the third part that we, the third, third, the third tool or the third in the data flow is, this is basically, this is where we manipulate the playground, which is, this is where we are going to manipulate the data, or where, so this is where, this is on the screen where we no, we will manipulate the data here and provide crude options here. Now what does crude stands for? Create, update, roll back, and delete. So, or yeah, you will have all of these possible options, right? Now this will be done in the playground. The next thing that we have is the view. The view is basically where, after getting the data, the view has to change, right? So this is basically effect on the view when we have the data with us. How will the data be? So this is the third part. Again, memory you can be classified as two things. One is you have a volatile, non-volatile. Again, both have their drawbacks. The non-volatile one is very fast. It's in the chip as well, right? So the device power is, if it goes out, then the RAM goes out. The SSD remains, but it's slow, right? Because it is out of the object. The core data uses the NS to freely change data in the memory. It updates, deletions. Now we'll see that later on. The word context means everything related to some event. Okay. That is base. Okay. Okay. Now then the NS. Okay. So now we have something called as the playground is the third part, and then the memory. Now NS managed object context. Now core data uses the NS managed object context as a space to let you freely change data in the memory, where it is where updates, deletions, and creations and new data objects takes place. So there is something called as NS managed object. So we are going to change the data in the memory. Now the word context means everything related to some event or idea you can make sense of. When you have data objects in the memory, the operating has to know where this memory is related to. Is it for app A or B? Okay, so now this container also provides us with something called as the NS managed object context. Now the responsibility of this context, it's kind of creates a context with referring to the memory and where the data is stored, so that in that context itself we can uh, perform any manipulations, or change the data, delete the data, and so on. Or you can save it, and then again the container will do that. Okay, so this is the view. Basically what happens. Okay, now there is something called as at the rate environment. What does the at the rate is basically a wrapper. Now what this environment does is it kind of creates a global storage, so that it can be data can be passed around within the screens. There is an issue with data passing, right? In Swift, you need to pass it from the parent to the child. Even if you're using bindings, it will be always from parent to the sub, like the from the view to the sub view, not from the sub view to the view. So to have that effect, we use something called as environment. Basically what I'm saying is the data will be we can manage that data as long as it is in the local scope, right? Okay, so now to summarize it, what we can say is, first is basically we have the um, first is the data. So how to summarize it, like in all, how that our data model will be. So summary. The first is we always need to create a blueprint of the data in our file. So this is basically the data model. Then the next thing that we have is something called as, okay, let's copy this itself. And then we have the toolbox, right? Or you can say, how should I manipulate this data? Now this toolbox is basically, now what does this toolbox contain? Um, this toolbox has something called as ns ns container. Now this ns container basically is responsible for managing the data in the ssd, like which part of the ssd to store, and it also provides other tools. And it also provides a function which is something which is called as an ns context. Basically what this context means is, this context um, tells us, um, so if I have multiple data, right, then there should be a reference to that data, like how that data will be managed. So for that reason we have something called as a context which is created. Okay, now once we have this, the next thing that we have in our flow is, um, the next thing, or the next data that we have in our flow is basically, this is the toolbox is done, right? Now we have the view, no, uh, the playground. This is responsible for performing updation, delete, and other other possible um, other possible operations on the data. Now once we go ahead, the next the next thing that we have is basically, this is the view, like what should happen to the view when we, like the view updation, or you can say how should the view change once we have the data. Remember, once we have the data, the the this view should also update, right? Because else we'll be having the old data. Okay. Um. Okay. So yeah, this is all for the introduction. I hope you guys liked it, and then in the next we'll be seeing how to set up all of these and manage them, and um, we'll see you guys in the next one. Till that time, take care. Bye bye.